The morning air tasted like dust and shame. Eleanor Vale stood at the back of the crowd in Red Hollow's town square, her fingers gripping the rough fabric of her apron until her knuckles ached. Around her, the entire population of the frontier town had gathered, ranchers in their Sunday best, miners still smelling of copper and sweat, merchants who'd closed their shops for this spectacle. Even the saloon girls had come out, their painted faces bright with curiosity. Sheriff Boone stood on the wooden platform like a king surveying his subjects, his badge catching the harsh Montana sun. Beside him, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, stood Cade Mercer. Eleanor knew who he was. Everyone did. Iron Ridge Ranch sat 15 miles north, carved into land so brutal it had killed 3 previous owners. Cade had held it for 6 years through drought, winter storms, and cattle thieves. He rarely came to town, and when he did, he spoke to no one. Now he was here because the sheriff had given him no choice. "Gentlemen, ladies," Sheriff Boone's voice boomed across the square. "We are gathered today for a historic occasion, a marriage that will unite 2 of our territory's finest citizens and strengthen the bonds of our community." Eleanor's stomach turned. She'd heard about this twisted arrangement. The sheriff had been pressuring Cade for months, something about taxes, land disputes, political alliances. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that Boone had found a way to force Cade's hand, and he'd turned it into entertainment. Around Eleanor, the young women of Red Hollow primped and preened. Sarah Whitmore adjusted her silk ribbon. Catherine Doyle smoothed her copper curls. Even Martha Brennan, the banker's daughter, who usually ignored such common displays, stood straighter, her chin lifted. They all expected to be chosen. Eleanor felt the familiar weight of invisibility settle over her shoulders like an old coat. She shouldn't have come. She'd only walked over from the boarding house because Mrs. Talbot had insisted, claiming it would look suspicious if Eleanor didn't attend. But standing here watching the spectacle made her feel smaller with each passing second. "Now," Sheriff Boone continued, his smile sharp as a knife blade, "Mr. Mercer has agreed to select his bride from among Red Hollow's eligible ladies. The lucky woman will become mistress of Iron Ridge Ranch, and let's get this over with." Cade's voice cut through the sheriff's speech like an axe through kindling. The crowd murmured. Sheriff Boone's smile tightened, but he stepped aside with a theatrical bow. "Of course, Mr. Mercer, the choice is yours." Cade stepped forward. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of years spent wrestling cattle and hauling timber. His face was weathered, lined at the corners of his eyes in a way that made him look older than his 32 years. He wore simple clothes, work pants, a worn shirt, boots that had seen better days. No attempt to dress up for the occasion. His eyes swept across the crowd, and Eleanor felt herself shrink further back. She shouldn't be here. She should leave before— "Eleanor Vale!" The words hung in the air like smoke. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the laughter started. It began as scattered chuckles, confused, uncertain. Then it grew. Someone near the front let out a guffaw. A woman's high-pitched giggle cut through the noise. Within moments, the entire square was roaring with laughter. Eleanor felt her face burn. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. Every eye in Red Hollow had turned toward her, and in those eyes she saw what she'd always seen: mockery, disbelief, cruel amusement. "Eleanor Vale?" Sheriff Boone's voice carried genuine shock. "The boarding house cook?" More laughter. Eleanor wanted to disappear into the dirt. She wanted to run. Her legs tensed, ready to bolt back to the kitchen where she belonged, where she was invisible, where nobody— "Eleanor Vale," Cade repeated, his voice steady and clear. "You hear me, ma'am?" The laughter began to fade, replaced by confused whispers. Eleanor stood frozen, her mind racing. This had to be a mistake, some kind of cruel joke. Cade Mercer couldn't possibly. "I asked you a question." Cade's eyes found hers across the crowd. They were gray, hard as winter stone. "You hear me?" Eleanor's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I hear you." "Then step up here." The crowd parted like a river around a rock, creating a path between Eleanor and the platform. Every step felt like walking through fire. She could hear the whispers sharp as wasps. "Her? The fat one?" He must be blind. "This is a joke, right? It has to be. Look at her dress, stained from the kitchen." "Poor thing probably thinks this is real," said. Eleanor climbed the 3 steps to the platform. Her legs shook. Cade stood waiting, his expression unreadable. Up close, she could see the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands, the way his jaw was set like he was preparing for a fight. Sheriff Boone recovered his composure, though his smile had frozen into something brittle. "Mr. Mercer, I think perhaps there's been some confusion. Surely you meant—" "I meant Eleanor Vale." Cade's tone left no room for argument. "That's who I'm choosing." The sheriff's face darkened. "This is highly irregular. The arrangement was that I pick someone from this town and marry her. That's what I'm doing." Cade turned to Eleanor. "You willing?" Eleanor's mind spun. This made no sense. Cade Mercer didn't know her. They'd never spoken. She was nothing, nobody. A widow who scrubbed floors and cooked meals for boarders who barely noticed she existed. She was 42 years old, heavy, plain, invisible. Why would he choose her? The laughter had died completely now, replaced by something uglier. Eleanor could feel the hate radiating from the young women who'd expected to be chosen. She could see Sheriff Boone's anger simmering beneath his forced smile. She could sense the mockery from every corner of the square. If she said yes, she'd be leaving behind her small room, her predictable life, her safety. She'd be tying herself to a stranger and a ranch that killed people. She'd be confirming what everyone already believed, that she was desperate enough to accept scraps of pity. But if she said no, she'd go back to the boarding house, back to Mrs. Talbot's constant criticism, back to serving men who looked through her like she was furniture, back to a life where she existed but didn't live, where each day bled into the next in a gray fog of invisible servitude. Eleanor looked at Cade Mercer. His face showed no pity, no mockery, just a question waiting for an answer. "Why me?" The words came out before she could stop them. "That's my business," Cade said. "What's yours is whether you're willing or not." Not a promise, not even kindness, just honesty. Something hard crystallized in Eleanor's chest. She'd spent 20 years being invisible, being mocked, being treated like a burden people tolerated out of charity. 20 years of making herself smaller, quieter, less. She was done. "I'm willing," Eleanor said, loud enough for the entire square to hear. The crowd erupted. Angry shouts from the young women, confused protests from their parents. Sheriff Boone's face turned red as he tried to regain control of the situation. "This is absurd!" Sarah Whitmore's mother pushed forward. "Sheriff, you can't allow this farce. My daughter—" "Your daughter wasn't chosen," Cade said flatly. "Eleanor was." "We done here, Sheriff?" Boone's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Eleanor saw something dangerous flash across his face. Calculation, anger, something that made her spine stiffen. But then he plastered the smile back on and spread his hands. "If this is truly Mr. Mercer's choice, then I suppose we must respect it." His voice dripped with false cheer. "Though I must say, this is not quite what I envisioned when we discussed strengthening community bonds. I'm sure it's not." Cade turned to the minister, a nervous man named Howell, who'd been standing at the edge of the platform. "You ready?" Yes, of course, but—" Minister Howell glanced at the sheriff, then at Eleanor, then back at Cade. "Perhaps the lady would like some time to prepare. A proper ceremony requires—" "Now," Cade said. The ceremony lasted 4 minutes. Minister Howell stumbled through the vows like a man walking on ice. Eleanor repeated the words in a voice that didn't sound like her own. Cade's responses were clipped, businesslike. No rings were exchanged, no kiss sealed the union. When Howell finally declared them married, the square had gone eerily quiet. "Gather your things," Cade told Eleanor. "We're leaving in an hour." He stepped down from the platform without another word, cutting through the crowd that parted silently before him. Eleanor stood alone on the wooden planks, feeling hundreds of eyes boring into her back. She'd just married a stranger in front of the entire town, and she had no idea what happened next. The walk back to the boarding house felt longer than the mile it actually was. Eleanor moved through the streets in a daze, her mind unable to catch up with what her mouth had done. Married. She was married. To Cade Mercer, a man she didn't know, heading to a ranch she'd never seen, for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. Mrs. Talbot met her at the kitchen door, her thin face twisted with fury. What in the devil's name did you just do? Eleanor pushed past her, heading for the narrow stairs that led to the servants' quarters. I got married. To that? That rancher? Mrs. Talbot followed, her voice rising. Eleanor, have you lost your mind? He chose you out of spite to humiliate the sheriff. You're going to be a laughingstock. I already am, Eleanor said quietly. She climbed the stairs to her small room, barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk containing everything she owned. It took her 20 minutes to pack, 2 dresses, one for work and one for Sundays, a few underthings, a hairbrush, the small Bible her mother had given her, though Eleanor rarely opened it, a photograph of her late husband, taken 2 weeks before the mining accident that had killed him 14 years ago. That was it. 42 years of life fit into a single trunk with room to spare. Mrs. Talbot stood in the doorway, wringing her hands. Her anger had shifted to something closer to concern, though Eleanor suspected it was more about losing her unpaid labor than actual worry. Eleanor, think about what you're doing. Iron Ridge Ranch is 15 miles from civilization. That man is practically a hermit. You'll be trapped out there with no one to help you, no way to leave. I've been trapped here for 6 years, Eleanor said, closing the trunk. At least this trap is different. But why would he choose you? Mrs. Talbot's voice dropped to something almost plaintive. It makes no sense. Unless... Her eyes widened. Oh, Eleanor, you didn't... Did he pay you? Is this some kind of arrangement? Eleanor felt a laugh bubble up, bitter and sharp. No, Mrs. Talbot, no money changed hands. I'm as confused as you are. She carried her trunk downstairs, refusing help. In the kitchen, the cook's assistant, a young woman named Betsy, watched with wide eyes. I heard what happened, Betsy whispered. Is it true? You really married Cade Mercer? Apparently. But why would he... Betsy caught herself, her face flushing red. I mean, it's all right. Eleanor set the trunk by the door. I don't know why either. A knock rattled the front entrance. Eleanor opened it to find a weathered man in his 60s standing on the porch. He had kind eyes and a gray mustache that drooped past his jaw. Mrs. Mercer. He tipped his hat. I'm Jack Sullivan. Work at Iron Ridge. Mr. Mercer sent me to collect your things. Mrs. Mercer. The name sounded foreign, impossible. This is everything. Eleanor gestured to the trunk. Jack lifted it like it weighed nothing. Wagons out front. Mr. Mercer's settling accounts at the mercantile, then we're heading out. Eleanor followed him outside. The wagon was old but well-maintained, drawn by 2 sturdy horses. Jack secured her trunk in the back, then helped her up onto the bench seat. You met Mr. Mercer before today? Jack asked as he climbed up beside her. No. Jack nodded slowly. Figured as much. He don't come to town often. Why did he choose me? The question escaped before Eleanor could stop it. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his hand steady on the reins. Not my place to say, ma'am, but I will tell you this. Boss don't do nothing without a reason. He might not explain it, but there's always a reason. They waited in silence. Eleanor watched Red Hollow's main street, seeing it with new eyes. The general store where she'd bought flour every week for 6 years. The church where she'd sat in the back pew every Sunday. The saloon she'd never entered but walked past twice daily. None of it had ever really been hers. Cade emerged from the mercantile carrying 2 large sacks. He tossed them into the wagon bed without looking at Eleanor, then swung up into the driver's seat on her other side. We're leaving, he said to no one in particular. The wagon lurched forward. Eleanor didn't look back. The journey to Iron Ridge Ranch took 3 hours. They traveled north, following a rutted road that grew steadily worse as they left civilization behind. The mountains rose around them like walls, their peaks still white with snow despite the late spring warmth. Pine trees, thick as a man's torso, crowded the edges of the trail. Cade and Jack didn't speak much. When they did, it was about practical things. A section of fence that needed repair, cattle that had wandered into the high pasture, supplies they'd need before winter. Eleanor wasn't included in these conversations, and she didn't try to insert herself. Instead, she watched the landscape change. Red Hollow sat in a valley that was relatively gentle, relatively green, but as they climbed into the foothills, the land became harsher, rockier. The trees grew more gnarled, fighting for purchase in thin soil. She saw evidence of old landslides, places where the mountain had simply shrugged and sent tons of earth cascading down. This was not forgiving country. See that? Jack pointed to a cluster of weathered crosses on a hillside. That's where the previous owner of Iron Ridge is buried, and his two sons. Jack, Cade's voice carried a warning. Just making conversation, boss. But Jack fell silent. Eleanor studied the crosses. What happened to them? Winter, Cade said after a pause. Caught them in the high country. Froze to death before they could make it back. All three of them. Tried to save each other. Stupid. Cade's jaw tightened. You don't go after someone in a winter storm. You wait it out, come back when it's safe. Eleanor heard what he didn't say. The previous owner had died trying to be a hero. They crested a ridge, and the land opened up before them. Iron Ridge Ranch sprawled across a valley carved between two mountain slopes. Eleanor could see a main house, several outbuildings, corrals that held maybe 30 horses, and beyond them, cattle dotting the hillsides like dark stones. A creek cut through the property, its water running fast and clear. It was isolated, brutal, magnificent. Home, Jack said with genuine warmth in his voice. As they descended into the valley, Eleanor saw signs of hard work everywhere. Fences in good repair, barns with new shingles, fields that had been cleared of rocks and prepared for planting. Someone had fought to make this place livable, and they'd won. 3 men emerged from the barn as the wagon rolled up to the main house. They were all younger than Jack, all wearing the same expression of barely concealed curiosity. Boys, Cade jumped down from the wagon. This is Eleanor. She's running the house now. You treat her with respect or you're gone. Clear? Yes, sir, they mumbled in unison. Cade grabbed Eleanor's trunk and headed for the house without waiting. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, less gracefully than she would have liked, and followed. The main house was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories built from rough-hewn logs and river stone. The porch wrapped around the front, and through the windows she could see curtains that looked like they hadn't been changed in years. Cade dropped her trunk in the front room and gestured around. Kitchen's through there. Bedroom's upstairs. You'll have the room at the end of the hall. I'm at the other end. Separate rooms. Eleanor felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. The men eat breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6, Cade continued. Jack will show you where everything is. You need supplies, tell him, and he'll get them from town. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. You might hear things about this ranch, about why the sheriff wanted me to marry into town. Ignore it. You're here to run the house, not get involved in business that's not yours. With that, he walked out. Eleanor stood in the empty room, her trunk at her feet, her new life settling around her like dust after a storm. Don't mind him, Jack appeared in the doorway, his voice gentle. He's not much for conversation, but he's fair. You'll see. What did I just agree to? Eleanor asked quietly. Jack smiled, sad and knowing. Honestly, ma'am, I don't think either of you knows yet. The first week at Iron Ridge Ranch nearly broke her. Not the work. Eleanor had been working hard her entire life. But the isolation, the silence, the sheer strangeness of her new existence felt like learning to breathe in thinner air. The house was a disaster. Oh, it was structurally sound. Cade maintained his buildings well, but it hadn't seen a woman's touch in years. Dust coated every surface. The kitchen had functioning equipment, but no organization. Curtains hung in tatters. The bedrooms upstairs were bare and cold, containing only beds and washstands. Eleanor cleaned with a fury that surprised her. She scoured the kitchen until the stove gleamed. She beat rugs until dust clouds choked the yard. She patched curtains, and when patches failed, she sewed new ones from flour sacks. She organized the pantry, threw out spoiled goods, made lists of what they needed. The ranch hands watched her with wary eyes, like she might disappear if they looked away. Cooking for 6 men was easier than cooking for the boarding house, at least in terms of volume. But these were men who worked from dawn until dark in brutal conditions. They needed fuel, and they needed it to taste like more than survival. Eleanor baked bread every morning, the smell filling the house before sunrise. She made stews that could simmer all day. She roasted meat, fried potatoes, baked biscuits that the men devoured faster than she could make them. On the 4th day, one of the younger hands, a boy named Tommy, who couldn't be more than 19, actually spoke to her. "Ma'am, this is the best food I've had in 3 years." It was a small thing, but it warmed something in Eleanor's chest that had been cold for a very long time. Cade remained distant. He ate meals in silence, thanked her curtly, then disappeared back into work. He left before dawn and returned after dark, often covered in dirt and sweat. Eleanor rarely saw him except at mealtimes, but she noticed things. He never raised his voice to his men. He worked harder than any of them. When Tommy's horse went lame, Cade spent 2 hours treating the animal himself rather than just shooting it. When a section of fence collapsed, he was the first one in the creek hauling out new posts. He was harsh, yes, demanding, but never cruel. On the 8th day, Eleanor was carrying water from the well when she heard raised voices from the barn. She set down her buckets and moved closer. "Don't care what you heard in town," Cade's voice cut through the air. "You work here. You keep your mouths shut about my wife. I hear one more joke, one more comment, you're done. Understand?" A younger voice, sullen. "We didn't mean nothing by it, boss. Just what everyone's saying. I don't give a damn what everyone's saying. Eleanor runs this house. She's pulled this place together in a week. Any man too stupid to see that can pack his gear and get out." Silence. Then Jack's voice, calm and steady. "What the boss is saying is you boys need to grow up. Mrs. Mercer is working harder than all of you combined. Show some respect." Eleanor stepped back, her heart hammering. She returned to the well, picked up her buckets, and went inside. That night, she made apple pie with the dried fruit she'd found in the pantry. It wasn't much, a small gesture, but when she set it on the table, Cade's eyes met hers for a brief moment. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, but they felt like more. The 10th day brought Eleanor's first real conversation with her husband. She was in the kitchen preparing supper when Cade walked in, earlier than usual. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table, which was unusual enough that Eleanor paused mid-stir. "There's something you need to know," Cade said without preamble. "Man named Victor Grayson is going to come calling soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. But he'll come." Eleanor turned from the stove. "Who is he? Owns half the county. Wants to own the other half." Cade's expression hardened. "Including this ranch. Why?" Cade was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You know anything about silver?" "Only that people kill for it." "Smart answer." Cade took a long drink of coffee. 5 years ago, a surveyor passed through these mountains, got drunk in Red Hollow, and started talking about silver deposits in the northern hills. Next morning, he was dead. Horse supposedly threw him off a cliff. Eleanor's hand stilled on the spoon. "Victor heard the talk before the surveyor died," Cade continued. "Started buying up land, but Iron Ridge was already mine, and the mineral rights came with the deed. He's been trying to get me off this property ever since." "The sheriff," Eleanor said slowly. "That's why he forced you to marry someone from town. Boone's in Victor's pocket. Has been for years." Cade's jaw tightened. "Figured if I married a local girl, Victor would have leverage. A wife who'd pressure me to sell, or who'd feed him information, or who he could threaten to make me cooperate." Understanding crashed over Eleanor like cold water. "That's why you chose me." "You're not from Red Hollow," Cade said. "You're not tied to any of the families Victor controls. And," he paused, choosing words carefully, "you've been invisible there for years. That means you see things, notice things. People talk around you like you're not even there." It should have hurt, hearing her invisibility stated so plainly. But Eleanor found herself nodding. "They do. So when Victor comes, and he will come, I need to know you won't be fooled by his charm or scared by his threats. I need to know you won't break." Eleanor turned off the stove and faced her husband directly. "Mr. Mercer, I've spent 20 years being ignored, insulted, and treated like furniture. I've survived 2 husbands, one who died and one who drank himself to death before he could. I've scrubbed floors for women who wouldn't meet my eyes and cooked for men who thought I was deaf. I'm still here." She met his gaze without flinching. "You want to know if I'll break? I've been breaking for 20 years. I'm tired of it. So no, I won't break for Victor Grayson or anyone else. Not anymore." Something shifted in Cade's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Good," he said. "Because he's a snake and he plays dirty." "How dirty?" Burned out 3 families last year who wouldn't sell. Killed a rancher and made it look like bandits. Owns the sheriff, the banker, half the town council. Cade's voice went flat. He's the reason I needed a wife in the first place. Boone threatened to arrest me on trumped-up charges if I didn't integrate with the community. Marriage was supposed to give them control. But you chose someone they couldn't control. I chose someone who had nothing to lose by standing up to them. The words hung between them, honest and brutal. Eleanor returned to the stove. Your supper will be ready in 20 minutes. Eleanor, Cade's voice stopped her. I know this isn't what you thought you'd be walking into. If you want out, I'll take you back to town. No hard feelings. Eleanor thought about Red Hollow, about the boarding house, about Mrs. Talbot and the invisible life she'd led. Then she thought about the ranch hands who'd started saying good morning, about the kitchen she'd transformed, about the satisfaction of work that mattered, of space that was hers to fill. I'm not leaving, she said. Cade nodded once. Then I'll teach you to shoot, tomorrow. Victor Grayson arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Eleanor had become Mrs. Mercer. She was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud approaching, 4 riders moving at a leisurely pace that suggested confidence rather than haste. She recognized the lead horse, a black gelding that probably cost more than some people's houses. Eleanor finished pinning the sheet she was holding, then walked to the house. Jack was mending tack on the porch. Company, she said quietly. Jack looked up, saw the riders, and his expression darkened. I'll get the boss. No. Eleanor surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. Let them come. I can handle a conversation. Mrs. Mercer, Jack, if I run every time someone rides up, what good am I? Jack studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll be in the barn. You need me, you yell. The riders pulled up in front of the house just as Eleanor finished setting the laundry basket inside. She walked out onto the porch, her hands clasped in front of her, and waited. Victor Grayson was exactly what Eleanor expected, polished, handsome in a predatory way, dressed in clothes too fine for ranch country. He dismounted with practiced grace and swept off his hat. Mrs. Mercer, I presume. His voice was smooth as snake oil. Victor Grayson, I'm afraid I missed the pleasure of your wedding. Mr. Grayson, Eleanor kept her tone neutral. I wanted to come by and welcome you properly to our little corner of Montana. He smiled, all teeth. It must be quite an adjustment, leaving town for such remote accommodations. I'm adjusting fine. I'm sure you are. Though I confess, your marriage came as quite a surprise to everyone in Red Hollow. His eyes assessed her with the same expression Eleanor had seen on merchants evaluating damaged goods. We all expected Cade to choose differently. There it was, the first cut, delivered with a smile. I imagine you did, Eleanor said calmly. Victor's smile tightened fractionally. I hope my old friend Cade explained the realities of ranching out here. It's dangerous work, isolated. Many women find it unbearable. I'm not many women. Indeed, Victor's tone suggested the opposite. Well, I came by to make you an offer, Mrs. Mercer, a generous one. I'm prepared to purchase Iron Ridge Ranch for twice its market value, enough for you and Cade to live comfortably anywhere you choose. Town, perhaps, or even a city back east. This ranch isn't for sale. I haven't finished, Victor's voice hardened slightly. You see, I'm going to acquire this property eventually. That's simply a fact. The only question is whether I do it the easy way or the hard way. For your sake, I hope Cade chooses the easy way. Eleanor felt her spine stiffen. This man had stood on her porch for less than 5 minutes, and he was already making threats disguised as courtesy. She thought about running, about nodding and smiling and telling him she'd talk to her husband. Then she thought about 20 years of making herself smaller. Mr. Grayson, Eleanor said, her voice level and cold, I've heard about you, about the families you've burned out, the rancher you had killed, the sheriff you bought. So let me make something clear. I'm not some frightened girl you can intimidate, and this isn't my first time dealing with men who think money makes them important. Victor's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. This ranch is not for sale, Eleanor continued. Not for twice its value, not for 10 times. You want it? You'll have to go through me and my husband and every hand on this property, and I promise you, Mr. Grayson, we'll make it expensive." For a long moment, Victor simply stared at her. Then he laughed, though it didn't reach his eyes. My. Cade did choose well, didn't he? He placed his hat back on his head. "I'll be seeing you again, Mrs. Mercer, soon." He mounted his horse and rode off without another word, his men following. Eleanor stood on the porch until the dust settled. Then her legs started shaking, and she had to sit down. Jack emerged from the barn, Tommy behind him. Both men looked at her with expressions Eleanor couldn't quite read. "You heard?" she asked. "Every word," Jack said. "You just made an enemy, ma'am." "I've had enemies before." "Not like Victor Grayson." Eleanor thought about the man's cold eyes, his casual threats, his certainty that he would win. "Then I guess we'll see what happens," she said. That night, when she told Cade about the encounter, he listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for so long she thought he might be angry. Finally, he spoke. "You should have called for me." "Would you have said anything different?" "No." "Then what's the problem?" Cade looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "The problem is now he knows you're not afraid of him. That makes you dangerous, and dangerous people don't live long in Victor's world." "I'm tired of being afraid," Eleanor said simply. "I've been afraid my whole life. It hasn't kept me safe. It's just made me small." Understanding passed between them, recognition of something shared, some common wound neither had named. "Tomorrow," Cade said, "we start your shooting lessons." "And Eleanor?" "Yes?" "What you did today, standing up to him, that took more courage than most men I know possess." He stood up from the table. "You're stronger than I thought. That's good. We're going to need it." He left her sitting in the kitchen, his words echoing in her ears. For the first time since she'd arrived at Iron Ridge Ranch, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she mattered. The shooting lessons started at dawn. Eleanor stood in the clearing behind the barn, her feet planted in the dirt, a rifle heavy in her hands. Cade stood beside her, his arms crossed, watching with the same intensity he brought to everything. "It's not complicated," he said. "Aim, breathe, squeeze. Don't jerk the trigger." Eleanor raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel at the tin can perched on a fence post 50 feet away, and fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. The can remained untouched. Again! She fired 6 more times, missed every shot. Her shoulder ached and her ears rang despite the cloth stuffed in them. "I'm terrible at this," Eleanor said, lowering the rifle. "You're learning." Cade took the gun, reloaded it with quick, practiced movements. "Most people never get this far. They fire once, hate the noise and the kick, and quit. You're still standing. That counts." Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor practiced every morning. The rifle became familiar in her hands, still heavy, still brutal when fired, but no longer strange. She learned to anticipate the recoil, to breathe through the explosion of noise, to keep her eyes open when every instinct screamed to close them. On the 16th day, she hit the can. The metallic ping carried across the clearing, and Eleanor felt a surge of satisfaction so fierce it surprised her. Cade nodded once. "Good. Now do it 9 more times." She didn't hit 9 more, but she hit 3 out of 10, which Cade declared acceptable for basic defense. "You're not going to win any competitions," he said as they walked back to the house. "But if someone comes at you, you can make them think twice." Eleanor carried that knowledge like armor. The ranch settled into rhythms that felt almost normal. Eleanor rose before dawn to start breakfast, fed the men, spent her days cleaning, mending, cooking, managing the household with an efficiency that surprised even her. The hands stopped watching her with suspicion and started treating her like she belonged. Tommy brought her wildflowers once, mumbling something about brightening up the kitchen. Jack taught her which herbs grew wild on the property and could be used for cooking or medicine. Cade remained distant but not unkind. They ate meals together, discussed practical matters, supplies needed, fence repairs, weather predictions, but rarely spoke of anything personal. Eleanor didn't push. She sensed he was a man who'd built walls for good reasons, and she had her own walls to maintain. But sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, she'd hear him moving around downstairs. She'd come down to find him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, a cup of cold coffee forgotten in front of him. The first time it happened, Eleanor almost retreated. But something in his posture, the way his shoulders curved inward, the exhaustion carved into his face, stopped her. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. Cade looked up, seemed to consider lying, then shrugged. "Happens sometimes." Eleanor moved to the stove and started heating water. "My first husband had nightmares, mining accident dreams. He'd wake up convinced he was buried alive." "What did you do?" "Made him tea, sat with him until he could breathe again." She measured out herbs into a pot. It didn't fix anything, but it helped. She poured 2 cups and sat across from him. They drank in silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantel. "Victor's going to escalate," Cade said finally. "What happened on the porch, that was a test. You passed, but now he knows we won't fold easy." "What will he do?" "Hard to say. He's got the sheriff in his pocket, so legal harassment is likely. Trumped up charges, tax audits, claims about property lines." Cade's jaw tightened. "Or he'll go old-fashioned. Burned barns, dead cattle. Make life here so miserable we have no choice but to leave." "And if we don't leave?" "Then he'll try to kill us." The words hung in the air, stark and honest. Eleanor should have been terrified. Instead, she felt a strange calm settle over her. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I know." Cade met her eyes. "That's what worries me." 3 days later, 2 of their best horses went missing from the north pasture. Jack and Tommy searched for hours, but found nothing except fresh tracks heading toward the mountains, tracks that suggested the animals had been driven off deliberately. Cade said nothing, but his expression went cold and hard as winter stone. The next week, someone cut their fence on the eastern border. 50 head of cattle wandered onto Victor Grayson's land before the damage was discovered. It took 2 full days to round them up, and when Cade rode to Grayson's ranch to retrieve them, Victor's foreman claimed they'd been eating Grayson grass and demanded payment. "You cut our fence," Cade said flatly. "Prove it," the foreman replied with a smile. Cade paid. Eleanor saw what it cost him. Not the money, but the submission, the forced swallowing of rage and injustice. That night, he threw a plate across the kitchen. It shattered against the wall, and for a moment the violence hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor didn't flinch. She'd seen worse. "Feel better?" she asked. Cade looked at the broken ceramic, then at her. "No." "Good. Would have been a waste of a perfectly good plate otherwise." Eleanor grabbed a broom and started sweeping. "You know what Victor wants?" "My land." "No. He wants you angry, wants you to do something stupid so the sheriff can arrest you and claim justification." She dumped the shards into a bucket. "Don't give him what he wants." "So what do I do? Just take it? Let him steal from me piece by piece until there's nothing left?" "You wait. You document everything, and when the time comes, you make sure you're not alone." Cade stared at her. "You've thought about this." "I've dealt with bullies before. They're all the same. They need you isolated and scared. Soon as you're neither, they lose power." "And how do you propose we stop being isolated? In case you haven't noticed, we're 15 miles from anywhere, and most of Red Hollow thinks we're a joke." Eleanor set down the broom. "Then we remind them we're not." The opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, Eleanor was in the garden when she heard shouting from the road. She looked up to see a wagon careening toward the ranch, one wheel wobbling dangerously. The driver was a woman Eleanor vaguely recognized from town, Mrs. Hendricks, the preacher's wife. The wheel gave out 50 yards from the house. The wagon lurched sideways, and Mrs. Hendricks screamed as it tipped. Eleanor ran. She reached the wagon just as it settled on its side. Mrs. Hendricks was trapped underneath, her leg bent at an angle that made Eleanor's stomach turn. Blood soaked through her dress. "Jack!" Eleanor's voice cut across the yard. "Get Cade! Now!" She knelt beside the wagon, assessing the damage with hands that wanted to shake but couldn't afford to. The wheel had come down on Mrs. Hendricks' leg, pinning her. The woman was crying, her face sheet white with shock and pain. "Listen to me," Eleanor said firmly. "We're going to get you out, but you need to stay still. Understand?" Mrs. Hendricks nodded, tears streaming down her face. Cade and Jack appeared within seconds. They took in the situation with quick, practiced eyes. "We lift on 3, Cade said. "Eleanor, soon as there's clearance, you pull her out." Eleanor positioned herself, gripping Mrs. Hendricks under the arms. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady. 1, 2, 3. The men heaved. The wagon rose. Eleanor pulled, dragging Mrs. Hendricks clear just as Cade and Jack let go and the wagon crashed back down. Mrs. Hendricks screamed as they moved her, and Eleanor saw why. The leg was definitely broken, bone pressing against skin in a way that threatened to break through. "Get her inside," Eleanor ordered. "Jack, I need clean cloth, hot water, and whiskey. Cade, find me something straight and sturdy for a splint." They moved with military precision. Within minutes, Mrs. Hendricks was laid out on the kitchen table, her leg elevated, her face gray with pain and shock. Eleanor had set bones before. Her second husband had broken his arm twice, and the town doctor had been drunk both times. She'd learned by necessity, by desperation, by having no other choice. Her hands remembered. She gave Mrs. Hendricks whiskey, 3 long pulls that made the woman cough and sputter. Then she examined the break, feeling along the bone with careful fingers. "This is going to hurt," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm sorry." She pulled. Mrs. Hendricks' scream could have shattered glass. Eleanor felt the bone slide back into alignment, felt the sickening shift of broken pieces finding their places. She worked quickly, wrapping the leg tight, securing the splint, checking circulation in the foot. When she finished, Mrs. Hendricks had passed out from the pain. "Is she going to be all right?" Jack asked, his face pale. "If the leg doesn't get infected, yes." Eleanor wiped blood from her hands, surprised to find them steady. "She'll need to stay off it for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer." Cade had been watching from the doorway. "I'll ride to town, tell Hendricks what happened. Tell him his wife is staying here until she can travel," Eleanor said. Moving her now could undo everything. Cade nodded and left. Mrs. Hendricks woke an hour later, groggy and disoriented. Eleanor sat beside her, offering water and quiet reassurance. "You set my leg," Mrs. Hendricks said, her voice weak. "Yes." "I thought everyone said you were just a cook. Nobody mentioned you knew medicine." Eleanor felt the old familiar sting, the assumption that she was only one thing, only capable of one role. But she pushed it aside. "I know enough," she said simply. Mrs. Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For laughing. At the wedding. I thought—" She trailed off, shame coloring her pale cheeks. "I thought Cade had made a terrible mistake, that you'd be useless out here." Eleanor should have felt satisfaction, should have thrown the words back, demanded better. But looking at this woman, broken and vulnerable and genuinely ashamed, she found she didn't have the energy for anger. "You weren't wrong to think it," Eleanor said. "I didn't know what I was walking into either. But you've made it work." "I'm trying." Reverend Hendricks arrived before sunset, riding hard enough that his horse was lathered with sweat. He burst into the kitchen and stopped dead at the sight of his wife, pale and bandaged, but alive. "Sarah," he breathed. "I'm all right," Mrs. Hendricks said. "Eleanor saved me." The Reverend turned to Eleanor, and she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. Respect. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "No thanks necessary, but your wife needs rest and someone watching her for the next few days. Fever could still set in." "She can stay here?" Cade said from the doorway. Eleanor hadn't heard him return. "We'll set up the spare room. Eleanor can monitor her." Over the next 5 days, Eleanor became Mrs. Hendricks's nurse, checking the splint, watching for signs of infection, changing bandages. The Reverend visited daily, and each time he left, he seemed more thoughtful, more troubled. On the 3rd day, as Eleanor was helping Mrs. Hendricks eat soup, the woman spoke quietly. "People in town are talking about you." Eleanor's hand didn't pause in lifting the spoon. "They always have. It's different now. Word got around about what you said to Victor Grayson, about how you stood on your porch and told him to go to hell." "I didn't quite phrase it that way." A small smile. "Close enough. Sarah Whitmore's mother is furious, claims you've gotten above yourself, but others—" Mrs. Hendricks paused. "Others are saying maybe Cade knew what he was doing after all." Eleanor set down the soup bowl. "What do you think?" "I think you're braver than most men I know, and I think Victor Grayson made a mistake underestimating you." That night, after Mrs. Hendricks had fallen asleep and the house had gone quiet, Eleanor found Cade outside on the porch. He was staring at the mountains, their peaks silver with moonlight. "She's doing well," Eleanor said. "Should be able to travel in a few more days." "Good." Cade didn't look at her. "Reverend Hendricks told me something interesting today." "What's that?" "Victor's been pressuring him. Wants him to preach about the sanctity of community decisions, about respecting established order. Basically wants him to use the pulpit to turn the town against us." Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm night. "Will he do it?" "Hendricks says no. Says he's seen enough of Victor's methods to know which side is right." Cade finally turned to face her. "You fixed his wife's leg. Could have let her suffer, sent her to town and made her the doctor's problem. But you didn't. She needed help. She's also the wife of one of the most influential men in Red Hollow. And now she's telling everyone who'll listen that you saved her life." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Cade's face. "Victor wanted us isolated. You just cracked that isolation wide open." Eleanor hadn't thought of it that way. She'd just done what needed doing. "People have short memories," she said. "Maybe, but maybe not." Cade leaned against the porch rail. "What you did today, the way you handled that break, the care you showed, that's not something folks forget easily." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the night. An owl called from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said. "Go ahead." "Why did you really choose me? And don't say it was because I was invisible. There had to be a dozen women in town who fit that description." Cade was quiet for so long Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough. 3 years ago, I came to town for supplies. Stayed at the boarding house. You made breakfast that morning. Nothing fancy, just eggs and bacon and bread. But you noticed I'd ordered coffee and you'd run out of sugar, so you brought me honey instead. Said it was better anyway, wouldn't make the coffee bitter." Eleanor didn't remember. How many breakfasts had she served? How many men had passed through that kitchen? "It was a small thing," Cade continued, "but you paid attention. Noticed what I needed before I had to ask. And when Mrs. Talbot came through and snapped at you about something, some complaint that wasn't even your fault, you just nodded and fixed it without argument. No anger, no tears, just competence." He turned to look at her directly. "I saw a woman who knew how to survive, who didn't need praise or attention to do her work well, who could take a hit and keep standing. When the sheriff forced my hand, I remembered you." Eleanor's throat felt tight. "That's why? Because I made you breakfast 3 years ago? Because you were strong when you didn't have to be. Because you did good work even when nobody noticed. Because I needed someone who wouldn't break when things got hard." His expression softened slightly. "I was right, wasn't I?" Eleanor thought about the past month, about standing up to Victor Grayson, learning to shoot, setting a stranger's broken leg while the woman screamed, about every morning she'd risen before dawn, every meal she'd cooked, every small act of survival that had brought her here. "Yeah," she said quietly. "You were right." When Mrs. Hendricks left a week later, her leg properly splinted and healing well, she hugged Eleanor on the porch. "You'll come visit us in town?" she asked. "Maybe," Eleanor said, though they both knew probably meant no. "Well, if you ever need anything at all, you send word. We owe you." The Reverend shook Cade's hand, then Eleanor's. "What you've built here," he said, gesturing to the ranch. "It's good. Honest. Don't let anyone tell you different." They watched the wagon pull away, Mrs. Hendricks waving until they disappeared around the bend. "That'll cause talk," Jack said from behind them. "Good," Cade replied. "Let them talk." But talk wasn't all that came. 2 weeks after the Hendricks left, Sheriff Boone arrived with 3 deputies. They rode up like they owned the place, and Eleanor felt her stomach drop. Cade walked out to meet them, Eleanor following despite his warning look. "Boone," Cade said flatly. "Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Mercer." The sheriff's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm afraid I have some unpleasant business to discuss." "Then discuss it and leave." "There's been a complaint filed against you. Seems some cattle with your brand were spotted on government land up in the high country." "That's illegal grazing, Mr. Mercer. Serious offense." Eleanor saw Cade's jaw tighten. "Our cattle have been in the valley all month. Haven't moved them anywhere near government land." "Well, someone saw your brand. I'm going to need to inspect your herd. Make sure numbers match your records. It was harassment, pure and simple, but refusing would give Boone exactly what he wanted, an excuse to escalate. Fine, Cade said. Inspect away. Jack, show them the current count. The sheriff and his men spent 3 hours combing through the ranch, checking brands, comparing numbers, looking for any discrepancy they could exploit. Eleanor watched from the house, her hands busy with mending, but her attention fixed on the men moving through her property like wolves circling prey. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Sheriff Boone's frustration was visible as he mounted his horse to leave. This isn't over, Mercer, he said. It never is with you, Cade replied. After they'd gone, Cade came inside and poured himself whiskey. Eleanor had never seen him drink in the middle of the day. It's starting, he said. I know. It's only going to get worse. I know that too. Cade drained the glass. You can still leave. I could take you to the next town over, set you up somewhere safe. Stop, Eleanor interrupted. Stop offering me a way out. I'm not taking it. Eleanor? No, listen to me. She set down her mending and faced him directly. I spent 20 years being safe, being invisible, being so careful not to cause trouble that I forgot how to live. I'm done with that. Whatever's coming, I'm staying. You could die. I've been dying slowly for 20 years. At least this way I get to fight back. Something broke in Cade's expression. Some wall he'd been holding finally crumbling. He set down the glass and looked at her with eyes that held more than she'd seen before. You're insane, he said, but his voice held something close to admiration. Probably. Stubborn as hell. Definitely. And you make the best damn coffee I've ever had. Eleanor felt a laugh bubble up despite everything. That's what you're focused on? Coffee? Man's got to appreciate the important things. Cade moved toward the door, then stopped. Eleanor? Thank you. For staying. For standing with me. It means something. He left before she could respond, but his words stayed with her the rest of the day. That night, thunder rolled across the mountains. Eleanor lay in bed listening to the storm build, feeling the electricity in the air. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, then in sheets that hammered against the roof. She heard Cade moving around downstairs and went to investigate. He was at the window, watching the storm with an expression she couldn't read. Can't sleep? She asked. Storm like this, 3 years ago, killed 4 of my cattle. Lightning strike set the barn on fire. He didn't look away from the window. Lost everything I'd built that summer in one night. Eleanor came to stand beside him. But you rebuilt. Yeah, I rebuilt. He was quiet for a moment. My father used to say storms show you what's really built to last. Everything else just washes away. Smart man. He was. Died when I was 19. Left me this land and a lot of debt. Cade's reflection in the dark window looked older, wearier. I've been fighting to keep it ever since. Why? Eleanor asked. Why not sell? Move somewhere easier? Because running doesn't fix anything. It just means you carry the fear with you. He finally looked at her. You know that, though. That's why you're still here. Eleanor nodded slowly. Yeah, I know. The storm raged outside, but inside, standing in the quiet kitchen with rain drumming overhead, Eleanor felt something shift between them. Not romance, not yet, maybe never, but partnership, understanding, the recognition that they were both people who'd learned survival by bleeding for it. Get some sleep, Cade said gently. Tomorrow's going to be hard work. Always is after a storm. Eleanor went back upstairs, but sleep didn't come easy. She lay listening to the thunder, thinking about walls crumbling, about storms showing what lasted, about the strange life she'd built from the wreckage of humiliation. By morning, the storm had passed. The land was washed clean, and Eleanor walked out to find the world transformed, green and fresh and somehow new. Jack was already working, clearing debris from the yard. Tommy was checking fence lines. Cade stood on the porch, coffee in hand, surveying the damage. Lost some shingles, he said as Eleanor joined him. North fence is down, creek's running high, might have taken out the crossing. But the barn's still standing, Eleanor observed. Yeah, barn's still standing. They looked at each other and something passed between them, an acknowledgement that they'd weathered this storm, and they'd weather the next one, and the one after that. Whatever Victor Grayson threw at them, they'd face it together. And that, Eleanor realized, was worth fighting for. The weeks that followed the storm brought a deceptive quiet to Iron Ridge Ranch. Too quiet, Eleanor thought, as she kneaded bread dough in the kitchen, her hands working the rhythm she'd perfected over years of invisible labor. Outside, the men were repairing the north fence, their voices carrying through the open window on the summer wind. She'd learned to read the silences now. This one felt wrong. Cade came in just after noon, his shirt dark with sweat, a cut on his forearm he hadn't bothered cleaning. "Sit," Eleanor said, already moving toward the basin. "It's nothing." "Sit anyway." He sat. Eleanor cleaned the wound with steady hands, ignoring his slight wince when the alcohol hit raw flesh. The cut wasn't deep, but it was dirty, probably from barbed wire. "You need to be more careful," she said. "Need to get that fence fixed before the cattle wander. Can't afford to lose any more." Eleanor bandaged the arm in silence, then stepped back. "When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" Cade's jaw tightened. "I sleep enough." "You look like hell." "Thanks for noticing." "I'm serious, Cade. You're running yourself into the ground." She dried her hands on her apron. "Whatever Victor's planning, you won't be able to fight it if you collapse first." "I'm fine." "You're not, and we both know it." Eleanor met his eyes. "Let Jack handle the fence. Come eat lunch and rest for an hour." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then his shoulders sagged, just slightly, and he nodded. They ate together at the kitchen table. Cold chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden Eleanor had coaxed into productivity. Cade ate like a man who'd forgotten food could taste like anything other than fuel. "This is good," he said finally. "Everything I make is good." A ghost of a smile. "Yeah, it is." He set down his fork. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something about the ranch, about why Victor wants it so badly." Eleanor waited. "That surveyor I mentioned, the one who died, he didn't just find silver, he found a vein that could be worth hundreds of thousands, maybe more." Cade's voice went flat. "It runs right under the northern hills. Victor knows. That's why he's been so persistent." "How much does the sheriff know?" "Enough to make him dangerous, but here's the thing, the vein is deep. Mining it would require serious equipment, serious money. I don't have that kind of capital, and Victor knows it. He figures if he waits long enough, I'll have no choice but to sell or partner with him." Eleanor absorbed this. "So what's your plan?" "Keep refusing. Keep holding on. Hope he gives up before I run out of options." "That's not a plan. That's just stubbornness. You got a better idea?" Eleanor thought about it, turning possibilities over in her mind like stones. What if you didn't need Victor's money? What if you found another way to develop the claim? There is no other way. No bank's going to loan to a rancher with that kind of debt against hostile takeover attempts. Then don't go to a bank. Go to the people Victor's already hurt. Pool resources. Form a cooperative. Cade stared at her. "That's crazy?" "I was going to say interesting." He leaned back in his chair. "You think people would go for it?" "I think people hate Victor Grayson, and I think they'd love a chance to take something from him, especially if there's profit in it." Eleanor stood and started clearing plates. "The Hendricks owe us. So do the families Victor burned out. Build an alliance instead of standing alone. That would take time, coordination, trust. So start building." Cade looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You know, for someone who spent 20 years being invisible, you see things pretty damn clearly. Being invisible means you watch, you listen, you learn how people work." Eleanor pumped water into the basin. "And I've watched Victor. He's strong because everyone's too scared to band together. Break that fear, you break his power." Before Cade could respond, the sound of hoofbeats erupted from outside. Fast, urgent, wrong. They both moved to the window. Tommy was riding in hard, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. He nearly fell getting down, stumbling toward the house. "Boss, Mrs. Mercer!" His voice cracked with panic. "It's the high pasture crew. Storm washed out part of the trail. Marcus got thrown. His legs busted bad and they can't move him. They need help now." Cade was already moving, grabbing his rifle from above the door. "How bad is the trail?" "Real bad. Creek's running like a river. Don't know if we can get horses through." "We'll have to try. Jack!" Cade's voice boomed across the yard. "Get the medical kit and 2 strong horses. Tommy, you're coming back with us to show the way." Eleanor grabbed her coat. "I'm coming too." "No." Cade's voice was flat, final. "Too dangerous. Marcus needs his legs set. I'm the only one here who knows how to do it properly." "Eleanor, we don't have time to argue. If you leave him up there with a broken leg and no one who knows what they're doing, he could lose it, or die." She was already pulling on her boots. "I'm coming." Cade looked like he wanted to fight, but Tommy's panicked expression killed the argument. "Fine, but you stay behind me and you do exactly what I say. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out within minutes. Cade, Eleanor, Jack, and Tommy on 4 horses, supplies tied down tight. The trail climbed steadily into the mountains, following the creek that had transformed from a gentle stream into a roaring monster of muddy water and debris. Eleanor had never ridden this hard, this fast. Her thighs burned. Her hands ached from gripping the reins. But she kept pace, focusing on Cade's back ahead of her, on not falling, on breathing through the fear that tried to claw up her throat. The trail got worse. Sections had washed away completely, forcing them to pick through loose rock and mud. Twice Eleanor's horse stumbled and she thought they'd both go down. Each time the animal found its footing and they kept climbing. "There!" Tommy pointed ahead to where 3 men huddled under a makeshift shelter. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see Marcus on the ground, his face gray with pain. They dismounted and Eleanor rushed to his side. The young cowboy couldn't have been more than 22, and right now he looked 12, scared and hurting and trying not to show it. "Hey, Marcus," Eleanor said, keeping her voice calm. "Let me see that leg." He'd fallen badly. The break was just above the ankle, and from the swelling and the angle, Eleanor suspected multiple fractures. Marcus had passed out at some point, and someone had splinted the leg with branches and rope, crude but effective enough to prevent further damage. "We need to get him down," Eleanor said. "Now. This needs proper setting, and if infection starts up here, we'll never save it." "Trail's too dangerous," one of the other hands said. "That's why we sent for help instead of trying to move him ourselves." Cade surveyed the situation, his expression grim. "We'll have to rig a travois, tie him down and pull him behind a horse." "That'll take time," Jack said, looking at the sky. "And there's another storm building." Eleanor could see the clouds massing over the peaks, dark and heavy with rain. "How long to rig the travois?" 20 minutes if we're lucky." "Do it. I'll stabilize the leg better." They worked fast. Cade and Tommy cut poles and fashioned a makeshift stretcher, while Eleanor rewrapped Marcus's leg, giving him whiskey to dull the pain. The young man drank it down, his teeth chattering despite the summer heat. "Am I going to lose it?" he asked quietly. Eleanor met his eyes. "Not if I can help it, but you need to stay still and let us do our job." "Yes, ma'am." The first drops of rain started falling as they secured Marcus to the travois. Big, heavy drops that promised worse to come. "We need to move," Cade said. "Now." The descent was a nightmare. Rain came down in sheets, turning the trail into a river of mud and loose stone. The travois jolted and skidded behind Jack's horse while Cade rode ahead, finding the safest path through terrain that changed with every passing minute. Eleanor stayed close to Marcus, one hand on the travois, trying to steady it while fighting to keep her own horse from bolting. Lightning split the sky. So close, Eleanor felt it in her bones. Thunder followed immediately, a crack that made the horses scream and shy. "Easy," she murmured to her mount, gripping the reins with white-knuckled hands. "Easy." Ahead, Cade's horse reared as a section of trail gave way, sending rocks and mud cascading into the swollen creek. For a heart-stopping moment, Eleanor thought both horse and rider would go over. But Cade held on, bringing the animal back under control through sheer force of will. "This way," he shouted over the storm, directing them onto what looked like an even worse path. Steeper, narrower, but at least solid. They inched forward. Eleanor's world narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the next moment of not falling. Rain soaked through her coat. Her hands were so cold she could barely feel them. Behind her, Marcus whimpered with each jolt of the travois. "Almost there!" Jack called out. Eleanor looked up and saw the valley opening before them, the ranch buildings visible through the rain like a promise of safety. Then the creek jumped its banks, Water surged across the trail in a brown wave, carrying branches and debris. Eleanor's horse screamed and reared. She held on, barely, her legs clamping around the animal's sides. "Go, go!" Cade's voice cut through the chaos. They plunged forward, horses fighting through water that rose to their chests. The current pulled and pushed, trying to sweep them downstream. Eleanor felt her horse lose its footing, and her heart stopped. The animal found purchase and lunged forward, breaking free of the water onto solid ground. They'd made it. The ranch yard erupted with activity as they rode in. Hands rushed to help, to take the horses, to carry Marcus into the house. Eleanor slid from her saddle and her legs nearly gave out. Cade caught her arm. "You all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "That was the bravest damn thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "Or the stupidest. Maybe both." Eleanor found her voice. "Marcus? Get him inside. Do what you need to do." They carried the young cowboy to the kitchen table. It was becoming Eleanor's makeshift surgery, she realized, with grim humor. Marcus was conscious but fading in and out, shock and exhaustion taking their toll. Eleanor examined the leg in the lamplight. The ride down had made things worse. The brake had shifted, and now she could see bone pressing dangerously against skin. "I need more light, more whiskey, and someone to hold him down." Cade and Jack positioned themselves on either side of Marcus. Tommy hovered nearby, his young face pale. "Tommy, heat water," Eleanor ordered. "Keep yourself busy." She'd set bones before, but never one this bad, never with this much riding on getting it right. Eleanor gave Marcus more whiskey, enough to blur the edges of pain, but not enough to kill him. Then she positioned her hands on the brake, feeling for the bone beneath swollen flesh. "On 3, she said. "Hold him." She didn't count, just pulled. Marcus's scream tore through the kitchen. He thrashed, and Cade and Jack held him down with strength that would leave bruises. Eleanor felt the bone shift, resist, then finally slide into alignment with a sensation that made her stomach turn. But it was set. She worked quickly after that, wrapping, splinting, checking circulation. Marcus had passed out again, which was a mercy. When she finally stepped back, her hands were shaking and her dress was soaked with rain and blood. "He gonna make it?" Cade asked. "If the leg doesn't get infected, if he keeps it elevated, if he doesn't move for at least a month?" "Yes, probably." "That's a lot of ifs." "That's all I've got." The other men had crowded into the doorway, watching. When Eleanor met their eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Respect that went beyond courtesy, beyond obligation. One of the older hands, a grizzled man named Pete, who rarely spoke, stepped forward. "Mrs. Mercer, I've worked ranches from Texas to Montana. Seen a lot of women come and go. Most can't handle the life." He nodded slowly. "You ain't most women." "Pete's right," another hand chimed in. "What you did today, riding into that storm, setting that leg, that took guts." Eleanor felt heat rise in her face, embarrassment and pride mixing uncomfortably. "I just did what needed doing." "That's what makes it count," Jack said quietly. They carried Marcus upstairs to one of the spare rooms, and Eleanor set about making him as comfortable as possible. She'd need to check him every few hours, watch for fever, change bandages. The next few days would tell whether she'd saved the leg or just delayed the inevitable. When she finally made it back downstairs, the house had gone quiet. The storm still raged outside, but inside, lamps burned warm against the darkness. Eleanor found Cade in the front room, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey. "You should be asleep," he said without turning around. "So should you." He turned then, and the look on his face made Eleanor's breath catch. It wasn't desire exactly, not yet, but something deeper, recognition. "I was wrong about you," Cade said. "When?" "At the wedding. I thought I was choosing someone strong enough to survive here, someone who wouldn't break." He moved closer. "But you're not just surviving, Eleanor. He stopped, searching for words. "You're making this place better. Making us better. The men respect you. The ranch runs smoother. And today you rode into a damn storm to save a boy you barely know." Eleanor's throat felt tight. "He's one of ours. That's what you do. That's what you do. Most people would have stayed safe, let someone else take the risk." Cade set down his glass. "I need you to understand something. This ranch, this life, it's hard and it's dangerous. And it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But having you here, knowing you're standing with me, it changes things. How? It makes me believe we might actually win. They stood in the lamplight, the storm raging outside, the weight of the day settling around them like a blanket. Eleanor thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, invisible, silent, resigned to a life of quiet desperation. That woman felt like a stranger now. "I'm not going anywhere," Eleanor said. "You know that by now, right?" "Yeah, I'm starting to believe it." Thunder rolled across the mountains, closer now. Eleanor watched lightning illuminate Cade's face, seeing the exhaustion, the worry, the stubborn determination that matched her own. "Get some sleep," she said. "I'll watch Marcus tonight." "Eleanor, I mean it. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." She moved toward the stairs. "Besides, someone needs to be awake to make sure this place doesn't fall apart." She felt his eyes on her as she climbed, felt the shift in the air between them, something building, growing, not quite ready to be named. The night passed in increments. Eleanor checked Marcus every 2 hours, monitoring his fever, adjusting his position, making sure the splint stayed secure. The young cowboy woke once, disoriented and in pain. "Where am I?" "Safe. At the ranch. Your leg is set." "Hurts like hell." "I know. Here, drink this." She helped him with water and a bit more whiskey. "You're going to be fine, Marcus. But you have to stay still. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." His eyes struggled to focus. "You saved my life up there, didn't you? On the mountain." "We all did. It was a team effort. The boys are saying you're tougher than most of the men they've worked with." A weak smile. "Think they're right." Marcus drifted back to sleep, and Eleanor sat in the chair beside his bed, watching the storm slowly exhaust itself against the mountains. By dawn, the rain had stopped and the world outside was washed clean. She must have dozed off because she woke to find Cade standing in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "How is he?" Cade asked quietly. "Fever stayed down, that's a good sign." "And you?" "I'm fine." Cade handed her a cup. "You know, most wives would have had hysterics about yesterday, or at least complained about the mud and the danger." "I'm not most wives." "No, you're really not." He took a long drink of coffee. "Jack wants to throw you a party. The men think you deserve recognition for what you did." Eleanor felt embarrassment creep up her neck. "That's not necessary. Try telling them that. You've become something of a legend around here in less than 4 months." "A legend, right." Eleanor sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. "The fat widow who got lucky." "Don't." Cade's voice went sharp. "Don't do that. Don't diminish what you've done." "I'm not." "You are. Every time someone acknowledges your strength, you deflect or make yourself smaller. Stop it." He moved closer, his expression intense. "You rode into a storm. You saved a man's leg, probably his life. You've stood up to Victor Grayson, earned the respect of every hand on this ranch, and turned this house into an actual home. That's not luck. That's you." Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest. Some old defense she'd maintained for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I spent so long being nothing," she said quietly, "being invisible. Sometimes I still feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." "You're not pretending. This is who you've always been. You just finally have room to show it." Before Eleanor could respond, a knock on the doorframe interrupted them. Tommy stood there, hat in hand, looking nervous. "Sorry to interrupt, boss, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." Cade's expression hardened. "Who?" "Says his name is Marshal Nathan Briggs, federal marshal out of Helena." Eleanor and Cade exchanged looks. A federal marshal showing up unannounced meant trouble, either for them or for someone else. "Where is he at?" "Waiting in the yard." They went downstairs to find a man in his 50s standing beside a well-kept horse. He had iron gray hair, steady eyes, and the kind of presence that suggested he'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Mr. Mercer?" The marshal extended his hand. "Nathan Briggs. I apologize for the early visit, but I'm here on official business, and I'd prefer to handle it discreetly." "What kind of business?" Cade's voice was cautious. "The kind that involves Victor Grayson, Sheriff Boone, and a pattern of corruption that's been going on too long." Briggs glanced at Eleanor. Mrs. Mercer, I presume. I've heard interesting things about you. All true, I'm sure, Eleanor said dryly. A smile flickered across the marshal's face. May we speak inside? They settled in the kitchen. Eleanor insisted on making a proper breakfast, her hands needing something to do while they talked. Briggs accepted coffee and explained his presence. I've been investigating Victor Grayson for 2 years, he said. Land fraud, intimidation, suspected murder. But the man's careful. He insulates himself, uses intermediaries, makes sure nothing traces back directly to him. So why are you here? Kate asked. Because 3 ranchers have come forward willing to testify. They're scared, but they're angry enough to risk it. Problem is, their testimony only covers harassment and property damage. I need something bigger, something that proves he's ordering violence, not just benefiting from it. And you think I can help with that? I think he's been pushing you hard. Harder than most. If he's going to make a mistake, it'll be here. Briggs leaned forward. I want to put a deputy undercover on your ranch. Someone who can witness what happens, gather evidence. With federal testimony backing the ranchers, I can build a case strong enough to take down Grayson and everyone in his pocket. Eleanor set a plate of eggs in front of the marshal. Including Sheriff Boone? Especially Boone. He's the key to Grayson's local power. Cade was quiet for a long moment, thinking. And if this goes wrong? If Grayson finds out there's a federal agent here? Then things get very dangerous very quickly, Briggs said honestly. But they're going to get dangerous anyway. Grayson knows he's running out of time to force you off this land. He'll escalate soon. Having my man here just means we'll be ready when he does. Eleanor met Cade's eyes across the table. She could see him weighing the risks, calculating odds, trying to find the safe path. There is no safe path, she said quietly. Not anymore. We either fight or we run, and we're not running. Cade held her gaze, then nodded slowly. All right, Marshal. Bring your deputy. But he works like everyone else. No special treatment. If the men suspect something, it blows the whole thing. Understood. Briggs stood. He'll arrive within the week. I'll be in touch through coded messages. And Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Mercer? Thank you. What you're doing takes courage. After the marshal left, Eleanor and Cade stood on the porch watching the sun rise over the mountains. The storm had passed, leaving everything sharp and clear. We just declared war, Cade said. We've been at war. We just finally got some backup. He laughed, short and surprised. You know, 3 months ago, I thought I was choosing a housekeeper who wouldn't cause trouble. How's that working out for you? Terribly. But he was smiling. Best decision I ever made. They stood together in the morning light, 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate survival, and Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but purpose, direction. The knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it standing together. And that was more than she'd ever hoped for. The deputy arrived on a Tuesday morning disguised as a drifter looking for work. His name was Ben Carter, and he played the role perfectly. Worn boots, tired eyes, the kind of man who'd worked a dozen ranches and failed at all of them. Eleanor watched him ride up and saw through the performance immediately, but she kept her mouth shut. Cade hired him on the spot, and within a day, Ben was just another hand mucking stalls and mending fence. The other men accepted him without question. Jack seemed to sense something, but didn't ask, and Eleanor was grateful for the old foreman's discretion. Life settled into a tense waiting game. Marcus healed slowly upstairs, his leg showing no signs of infection despite Eleanor's constant worry. She changed his bandages twice daily, brought him meals, listened to his stories about growing up in Kansas. The young cowboy had taken to calling her ma'am with a reverence that made her uncomfortable. You know I'm just doing my job, she told him one afternoon while rewrapping his splint. No, ma'am. You're doing more than that. You're caring. Marcus shifted on the bed, wincing. My own mother wouldn't have ridden through that storm for me. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she focused on the bandage and changed the subject. Downstairs, she could hear Cade and Ben talking about cattle rotation. Good. The deputy needed to blend in, and the best way to do that was through work that left you too tired to think. 3 weeks passed with no movement from Victor Grayson. The silence felt worse than active harassment. Eleanor caught Cade staring out windows more often, his jaw tight, his hands restless. She understood the feeling, Waiting for violence was its own kind of torture. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, everything changed. Eleanor was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard horses. Not the casual approach of friends, but something faster, angrier. She straightened, her back protesting, and saw 5 riders coming hard down the trail. Sheriff Boone led them. Behind him rode Victor Grayson and 3 men Eleanor didn't recognize, hard-looking men with guns visible on their hips. Eleanor's heart kicked into a faster rhythm, but she kept her hand steady as she set down her weeding basket and walked toward the house. Cade emerged from the barn, Jack and Ben flanking him. The other hands materialized from various corners of the ranch, drawn by some instinct that said trouble was here. "Boone," Cade said flatly as the riders pulled up. "What do you want?" The sheriff dismounted, his badge catching the afternoon sun. "Got a warrant here, Mercer. Seems there's been some question about the legitimacy of your land deed. Judge wants to review the paperwork." Eleanor saw Cade's hands flex. "My deed is legal, been filed and recorded for 6 years." "Then you got nothing to worry about." Boone's smile was all teeth. "Just need you to come to town, sort this out with the judge." "What judge?" Jack asked. "Judge Morrison's been out of territory for 2 months. Special appointment, Judge Caldwell, brought in from Helena to handle disputed claims." Boone pulled a folded paper from his vest. "This here's official. You can come peaceful, or we can do this the hard way." Victor Grayson stayed on his horse, watching the scene with barely concealed satisfaction. His 3 men had their hands near their weapons, not threatening exactly, but ready. Eleanor moved to stand beside Cade. "Can I see that warrant?" Boone's eyes narrowed. "This is official business, Mrs. Mercer, doesn't concern you." "My husband's land concerns me." Eleanor held out her hand. "The warrant, please." For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then Boone handed it over, his smile turning ugly. Eleanor read quickly. The language was dense, legal jargon designed to confuse, but the gist was clear. Someone had filed a claim suggesting Cade's deed was fraudulent, that he'd never properly purchased the mineral rights, that the land should revert to territorial control pending investigation. It was garbage, complete fabrication, but it had a judge's signature and an official seal. "This is a lie," Eleanor said. "The deed is recorded at the land office. Anyone can verify it." "That's what the hearing is for, ma'am, to verify." Boone took the warrant back. "Now, Mr. Mercer, you coming peaceful?" Cade looked at Eleanor. She could see him calculating. If he refused, Boone had an excuse to arrest him. If he went, he'd be separated from the ranch, leaving it vulnerable. "How long?" Cade asked. "Hearing's scheduled for tomorrow morning. You'll need to stay in town tonight. Make sure you're present." "I'm coming with him," Eleanor said. "No." Cade's voice was firm. "You stay here. Keep the ranch running." "Cade." "Eleanor, please." His eyes held hers. "I need you here. Someone has to manage things, and it can't be me." She understood what he wasn't saying. If something happened in town, the ranch still needed defending. And Eleanor was the only one besides Jack that the men would follow without question. "Fine," she said. "But you're taking Ben with you." Cade started to protest, then caught the look in her eye. Ben was the deputy. If things went wrong in town, they'd need a federal witness. "All right. Ben, saddle up." Ben moved quickly, and within 10 minutes, Cade was mounted and ready to leave. He leaned down from his horse, his voice low enough that only Eleanor could hear. "If anything happens, anything at all, you send Tommy to get Marshal Briggs, understand?" "Nothing's going to happen." "Promise me." Eleanor met his eyes. "I promise." She watched them ride away. Cade and Ben surrounded by Boone's men like prisoners in everything but name. Victor Grayson lingered behind, his horse dancing in place. "Quite the little defender, aren't you, Mrs. Mercer?" Victor's voice carried across the yard. "Standing up for your husband like that." Eleanor didn't respond. "I tried to be reasonable," Victor continued. "Offered good money. Offered you both a way out. But you had to make this difficult. You had to stand on that porch and tell me no, like you actually had a choice in the matter. We do have a choice. And our answer hasn't changed." Victor's smile turned cold. "Choices require power, Mrs. Mercer. And you have none. Your husband will be tied up in legal proceedings for weeks, maybe months. His funds will be frozen pending the hearing. And this ranch," he gestured around the property, This ranch will slowly die without the resources to maintain it. You underestimate us. No, I think you overestimate yourself. Victor gathered his reins. Enjoy your last few weeks at Iron Ridge. I'll be back soon to discuss purchase terms, and this time you'll accept. He rode off, leaving Eleanor standing in the yard with her fists clenched and her heart hammering. Jack approached quietly. That was a setup. I know. Cade's going to be stuck in town, could be days, could be longer. I know that too. Eleanor turned to face the assembled hands. They were watching her, waiting, looking for leadership, for direction, for someone to tell them what to do now that the boss was gone. Eleanor had never led anything in her life. She'd followed orders, obeyed rules, made herself small and quiet and manageable. But that woman was gone. Listen up, Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the yard. Victor Grayson thinks we're going to fall apart without Cade here. He thinks we'll panic or give up or make mistakes he can exploit. We're going to prove him wrong. The men shifted, uncertain. We keep working, Eleanor continued. Same schedule, same jobs. Jack's in charge of operations. I'll handle supplies and planning. Ben, she caught the deputy's eye. You keep watch on the northern property. If anyone tries anything up there, I want to know immediately. Yes, ma'am, the hands replied in unison. And one more thing. Eleanor let her gaze sweep across each face. If trouble comes, we defend this place. Together. Understood? Understood. They dispersed to their tasks, and Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. She'd just committed them all to a fight that could end in bloodshed. Jack stayed behind. You sure about this, Mrs. Mercer? If Victor comes back with force, then we fight. Eleanor met his eyes. I'm done running, Jack. Done being scared. This is our home now. We defend it or we lose everything. Jack studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right then. I'll make sure the men are armed and ready. And ma'am, for what it's worth, I think the boss chose well. The first day passed in tense quiet. Eleanor threw herself into work, cooking, cleaning, organizing supplies with an efficiency that bordered on manic. Marcus was well enough to come downstairs now, hobbling on crutches Jack had fashioned from tree branches. The young cowboy insisted on helping with small tasks, and Eleanor let him peel potatoes and fold laundry while she kept one eye on the horizon. No word came from town. The second day brought rain, not the violent storms of earlier in the summer, but a steady, depressing drizzle that turned the yard to mud and shortened everyone's tempers. Eleanor made extra coffee and baked bread, trying to maintain normalcy while her mind spun through worst-case scenarios. Still no word from Cade. On the third day, Tommy came running from the north pasture, his face flushed with exertion. Mrs. Mercer, someone's up at the boundary. Ben spotted them near the silver vein. Eleanor grabbed her rifle, the one Cade had taught her to shoot, and followed Tommy out. They found Ben crouched behind a boulder, watching 3 men work at the base of the northern hills. What are they doing? Eleanor whispered. Setting up survey equipment, Ben replied, acting like they owned the place. Eleanor recognized one of the men, the foreman from Victor's ranch. The other 2 looked like hired muscle, guns prominent on their hips. They're trying to force the issue, Ben said quietly. Make it look like the land's already under development. Strengthens their legal claim. Eleanor thought fast. If they confronted the men directly, it could turn violent. But if they did nothing, Victor's people would establish a presence on their land. Can you get close enough to hear what they're saying? She asked Ben. Maybe. Why? Because if they're trespassing under orders, that's evidence. Federal evidence. Eleanor looked at the deputy. That's what you're here for, isn't it? To witness Victor's crimes? Ben nodded slowly. You're right, but if they spot me, then Tommy and I will provide a distraction. Eleanor checked her rifle. Give us 5 minutes, then move in. Before Ben could argue, Eleanor stood up and walked directly toward the survey team, Tommy scrambling to follow. Afternoon, gentlemen, Eleanor called out. Can I help you with something? The 3 men spun around, hands going to their weapons. The foreman, a thick-necked man named Dawson, relaxed slightly when he saw it was a woman. Mrs. Mercer, didn't expect to see you up here. This is my land. Where else would I be? Eleanor kept her rifle lowered but ready. What are you doing? Just conducting a survey. Official business. Whose authority? Judge Caldwell's. Part of the land dispute process. Dawson smiled without warmth. I'm sure your husband was informed. My husband's deed is legal and recorded. Whatever you're doing here is trespassing. That's for the court to decide, ma'am. Until then, we have every right to assess the property in question. Eleanor felt anger burn in her chest, hot and familiar. This was Victor's play. Occupy the land while Cade was stuck in town, create facts on the ground that supported their false claim. Pack up your equipment and leave, Eleanor said. Now, Dawson laughed. Or what? You gonna shoot us, Mrs. Mercer? That'll look real good at the hearing. Rancher's wife murdering survey workers. I won't shoot you for surveying. I'll shoot you for trespassing with intent to stake false claims. Eleanor raised the rifle slightly. Last warning. The two hired guns shifted, their hands moving toward their weapons. Tommy brought up his own rifle, his young face set with determination. For a moment, the mountain air crackled with the possibility of violence. Then a voice cut through the tension. I'd listen to the lady if I were you. Ben emerged from behind the rocks, and he wasn't alone. Jack and 3 other ranch hands flanked him, all armed, all looking like men who'd spent their lives doing hard things. Dawson's confidence faltered. This is illegal intimidation? No, this is property defense, Ben said calmly. You're on private land without permission. That's trespassing. The lady asked you to leave. We're making sure you do. The math was simple. 3 men against 7, with the defenders having both numbers and position. Dawson might be arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. Fine, we'll leave, but this isn't over. He jerked his head at his men. Pack it up. They loaded their equipment onto horses and rode off, Dawson throwing one last venomous look over his shoulder. Eleanor lowered her rifle, her hands finally starting to shake now that the danger had passed. That was reckless, Jack said, but his tone held respect. Could have gone bad real fast. It worked, didn't it? Eleanor turned to Ben. Did you hear anything useful? Enough. Dawson mentioned Victor by name, said they needed to establish visible presence before the weekend. That's direct evidence of conspiracy to defraud. Ben's expression was grim. But it also means Victor's timeline is accelerating. He's making his move. Then we need to be ready. Eleanor started walking back toward the ranch. Jack, I want double watches tonight. Men armed and positioned where they can see anyone approaching. Tommy, ride to the neighboring ranches, the ones Victor burned out. Tell them what's happening. See if they'll stand with us if it comes to a fight. You think it'll come to that? Tommy asked. Eleanor thought about Victor's cold eyes, about Sheriff Boone's satisfied smile, about the way they'd taken Cade away like a criminal. Yeah, she said. I think it will. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced the house, checking windows, making sure Marcus was comfortable, preparing food they might need if they ended up under siege. Her mind wouldn't stop spinning, through scenarios, through possibilities, through all the ways this could go wrong. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make coffee. She found Ben sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. Can't sleep either? He asked. Too much to think about. Eleanor poured 2 cups. How long have you been a marshal? 6 years, worked everything from bank robberies to land fraud. Ben reassembled the rifle with practiced ease. But this case is different. Victor Grayson's built an entire network of corruption. Sheriff, judge, half the town council. Taking him down means burning it all down. You think we can win? Honestly? I don't know. Ben met her eyes. But I know you've got more courage than most men I've worked with. The way you stood up to those surveyors today, that was either brave or crazy. Probably both. A smile flickered across Ben's face. Cade's lucky he found you. Eleanor thought about the wedding, about standing on that platform while the whole town laughed, about Cade choosing her when no one else would have. I think maybe I'm the lucky one, she said quietly. Before Ben could respond, the sound of hoofbeats erupted from outside, fast and urgent. Eleanor and Ben were on their feet immediately, rifles in hand. Jack burst through the door. Someone's coming. Whole group, maybe a dozen riders. Tommy spotted them from the North Ridge. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. Where? 10 minutes out, maybe less. Wake the men. Everyone armed and ready. Eleanor moved to the gun cabinet, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. This is it. The ranch erupted into organized chaos. Men grabbed weapons, took positions at windows and behind cover. Eleanor moved through the house, making sure every rifle was loaded. Every man knew his role. Marcus hobbled downstairs on his crutches, his young face set with determination. I can shoot from the window upstairs. Got good sight lines from there. Marcus, your leg. My leg's fine enough to pull a trigger, and I ain't hiding while everyone else fights. His eyes were hard. This is my home too, Mrs. Mercer. I'm defending it. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to protect him, but she understood the need to stand and fight, the impossibility of hiding while others bled for you. Upstairs window. Don't waste ammunition. Only shoot if you have a clear target. Yes, ma'am. The riders appeared like ghosts in the darkness, torches burning against the night. Eleanor counted 15 men, maybe more. At the front rode Victor Grayson and Sheriff Boone. They stopped at the edge of rifle range, just out of reach but close enough to be heard. Mrs. Mercer, Victor's voice carried across the yard. I'm here to discuss terms of surrender. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Behind her, she could feel her men watching, waiting. We're not surrendering anything, she called back. Then you're forcing my hand. Victor gestured to the men behind him. I have a court order giving me authority to seize this property pending resolution of the land dispute. You can leave peacefully, or we can remove you. Your choice. That's not a real court order, and you know it. You bought a judge and forged documents. Can you prove that? Victor's smile was visible, even in the torchlight. Because I have the sheriff here to enforce legal proceedings. Any resistance will be considered criminal. Eleanor's mind raced. Victor had them cornered. If they fought, Boone would call it illegal resistance and arrest or kill them all. If they surrendered, they lost everything. She needed more time, needed Cade back, needed Marshal Briggs to arrive with federal authority that trumped Victor's bought judge. Give us until morning, Eleanor said. Let us gather our things, prepare to leave properly. I'm done waiting, Mrs. Mercer. You've had months to accept reality. Now reality is forcing the issue. Victor raised his hand and the men behind him moved forward. You have 5 minutes to vacate the property. After that, we're coming in. Eleanor felt the men behind her tense, saw fingers tighten on triggers. One word from her and this turned into a bloodbath. But bloodshed meant losing everything they'd built, meant confirming Victor's narrative that they were criminals resisting legal authority. She needed another option. Needed? The sound of more hoofbeats cut through the night. Everyone turned toward the road, and Eleanor felt hope surge in her chest. Cade rode in like vengeance itself, Ben beside him and behind them. Behind them rode Marshal Briggs with a full federal detail of 6 armed deputies. At the rear came Reverend Hendricks with a group of men from town, including 3 of the ranchers Victor had burned out. Cade dismounted and walked straight to Eleanor. You all right? So far. He turned to face Victor. Looks like you started the party without me. Marshal Briggs rode forward, his badge visible in the torchlight. Mr. Grayson, Sheriff Boone, I'm U.S. Marshal Nathan Briggs. I have federal warrants for both of you on charges of conspiracy to defraud, illegal land seizure, bribery of public officials, and 3 counts of murder. The night went very quiet. That's ridiculous, Victor said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I'm acting under court authority. You're acting under a fraudulent court order obtained through bribery. Briggs gestured to his deputies. I have sworn testimony from Judge Caldwell admitting you paid him to issue that order. I have testimony from 3 ranchers detailing your pattern of intimidation. And I have a federal witness, he nodded at Ben, who observed your men trespassing on private property under your direct orders. Sheriff Boone's hand moved toward his gun. I wouldn't, Briggs said calmly. My deputies have orders to shoot anyone who resists arrest. And unlike your bought judge, my authority is legitimate. For a long moment, nobody moved. Eleanor could feel the violence hovering in the air like smoke, could see Victor calculating whether he could shoot his way out. Then Victor's shoulders sagged, just slightly. He'd lost, and he knew it. Stand down, he said quietly to his men. Boone looked like he might fight anyway, but 2 federal deputies had their rifles trained on him. He raised his hand slowly, his face twisted with rage. Marshal Briggs and his men moved in, disarming Victor's crew and placing both Victor and Boone under arrest. The process took 20 minutes, and through it all, Eleanor stood on the porch, watching justice finally arrive after months of fear and fighting. When the deputies led Victor past her, he stopped. "You know what you are," he said quietly. "You're a nobody who got lucky. You didn't win. You just survived long enough for someone else to save you." Eleanor looked at the man who'd terrorized an entire county, who'd murdered and stolen and crushed anyone in his path. Then she smiled. "You're right. I am a nobody. Just a fat widow who cooks and cleans. And I still beat you." She leaned closer. "That's got to hurt." Victor's face went purple with rage, but the deputies pulled him away before he could respond. Cade came to stand beside Eleanor as they watched the prisoners being loaded into a wagon. "You held them off," he said quietly. "I thought I'd get back to find the ranch burned or you gone. But you held them off." "We held them off," Eleanor corrected. "All of us." The assembled ranch hands were gathering now, joined by the men from town. Reverend Hendricks approached the porch, his expression solemn. "Mrs. Mercer, I want to apologize for laughing at your wedding, for not seeing what kind of person you were, for not standing up to Victor sooner." He glanced at the men with him. "We all owe you an apology." Eleanor looked at the faces of Red Hollow, people who'd mocked her, dismissed her, treated her as invisible for years. She should have felt vindicated, should have thrown their shame back in their faces. But she was too tired for anger. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on my men and make sure nobody's hurt." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving them standing on the porch. Inside, the ranch hands were celebrating, quiet celebration, but real. Marcus was grinning from ear to ear despite the pain in his leg. Jack was pouring whiskey for everyone. Even Ben had dropped his deputy persona and was laughing at something Tommy said. Eleanor moved through them, checking for injuries, making sure everyone was all right. These men had stood with her, had been willing to fight and possibly die to defend their home. They were her family now. Cade found her in his kitchen an hour later. The celebration had died down and most of the men had gone to bed. Eleanor was washing dishes, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind tried to process everything that had happened. "Leave those," Cade said quietly. "They can wait. I need to do something. My hands need to move." He understood. Instead of arguing, he picked up a towel and started drying. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes. "I was terrified," Eleanor said finally. "When Victor showed up with all those men, I thought we were going to die." "But you didn't run." "No, I didn't run." Eleanor set down a plate. "I'm not sure if that makes me brave or stupid. Both. Always both." Cade dried the plate and set it aside. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. What you did these past few days, holding the ranch together, standing up to Victor, protecting our home, that wasn't luck. That was you being exactly who you are." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "I was so scared. Being scared and doing it anyway. That's the definition of courage." She turned to face him, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was no distance in his eyes now, no walls, just raw, honest emotion. "I don't think I chose you at that wedding," Cade said quietly. "I think I got lucky. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I don't want you to be just my wife or my partner. I want—" He stopped, searching for words. "I want you to know that this is real, that you matter, that you're loved." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Eleanor had spent so long being unloved, being unwanted, being something people tolerated rather than chose. The idea that someone could actually love her, could see her and want her exactly as she was, felt impossible. But looking at Cade's face, she knew it was true. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to be loved. How to let someone in." "Neither do I." Cade moved closer. "But I think we figure it out together." Eleanor thought about all the walls she'd built, all the ways she'd learned to survive by being small and invisible. Thought about the woman she'd become over the past months, someone who rode into storms and set bones and faced down armed men. That woman didn't need to be small anymore. She kissed him. It was awkward at first. Neither of them had done this in years, and uncertainty made them clumsy. But then Cade's arms came around her and Eleanor let herself lean into his strength, let herself be held, let herself finally stop fighting long enough to feel. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he said. Not because you have to. Not because it's practical. Because you want to. Eleanor thought about Red Hollow, about the boarding house, about every invisible day she'd lived before this. Then she thought about Iron Ridge Ranch, about the men who'd fought beside her, about the home she'd built from nothing. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "This is where I belong." And for the first time in her life, Eleanor believed it. Morning came too soon, but Eleanor woke feeling different, lighter somehow, despite everything that had happened. She dressed and went downstairs to find Cade already at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of him, and exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. "Some." He gestured at the documents. "Marshal Briggs left these, evidence they collected against Victor. Wanted us to review it, make sure nothing's missing." Eleanor poured coffee and sat across from him. The papers detailed years of corruption, bribes, threats, burned homesteads, 3 murders that could now be directly tied to Victor's orders. It was overwhelming in its scope. "He destroyed so many people," Eleanor said quietly. "Yeah, and he would have destroyed us too if you hadn't stood your ground." Cade looked up at her. "Marshall said your testimony about the surveyors was key evidence. Without that, they might not have had enough to make charges stick." Eleanor thought about that moment on the mountain, facing down armed men with nothing but anger and a rifle she barely knew how to use. It seemed insane now, reckless. But it had mattered. "What happens to the ranch?" she asked. "With Victor arrested, with the land dispute resolved." "It's ours. Free and clear." Cade pushed the papers aside. "But there's something else. Something I need to talk to you about." Eleanor waited, recognizing the hesitation in his voice. "The silver vein is real. Briggs confirmed it with a federal surveyor. Worth more than I thought, maybe $500,000 if we develop it properly." Cade met her eyes. "That's life-changing money, Eleanor. We could mine it, sell out, live anywhere we want, never work another hard day." But mining it means bringing in equipment, workers, changing everything about this place. It means becoming the kind of operation Victor wanted to build. It means greed starts making decisions instead of us. Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. They'd fought to keep this ranch exactly because it wasn't about money. It was about home, about family, about building something honest in brutal country. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Cade was quiet for a long time. "I want to stay ranchers. I want to work this land the way my father did, the way it's meant to be worked. But that's easy for me to say. I've never had money, never needed it. You deserve better than a hard life breaking your back for cattle and horses." Eleanor thought about the boarding house, about serving meals to people who looked through her, about the years of invisible servitude that had hollowed her out until she barely recognized herself. Then she thought about the past months, about teaching herself to shoot, about riding into storms, about standing on the porch, facing Victor's men with a rifle in her hands, about the ranch hands who called her ma'am with genuine respect, about Marcus hobbling downstairs to fight because this was his home too, about Cade kissing her in the kitchen like she was something precious. "I've had easy," Eleanor said. "It felt like dying slowly. I'll take hard work and honest living over comfort any day." Relief washed across Cade's face. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She reached across the table and took his hand. "But I do have one condition." "What's that?" "The silver stays where it is, but we use the land rights as leverage. Form that cooperative I mentioned, bring in the families Victor hurt, give them ownership stakes in the mineral claims. They get security, we get allies, and nobody has to actually tear up the mountains unless they choose to." Cade stared at her. "That's actually brilliant. Share the wealth without destroying the land. Build a network Victor can't touch because it's too spread out, too many stakeholders. Plus it means the Hendricks family, the burned-out ranchers, all the people who stood with us, they get something real out of this fight. Not charity, partnership. You know people are going to talk, say we're crazy for not cashing out." Eleanor smiled. "People have been talking about us since the wedding. Let them talk." The conversation was interrupted by Jack knocking on the doorframe. "Sorry to intrude, but we've got company. Friendly this time, I think." Eleanor and Cade went outside to find a wagon pulling up. Reverend and Mrs. Hendricks, accompanied by 3 other families from town. They climbed down carrying baskets and bundles. "We heard about last night," Reverend Hendricks said. "Heard you defended the ranch against Victor's men. Figured you could use some supplies, some help." Mrs. Hendricks approached Eleanor. her legs still splinted but healing well. "And I brought the ladies from the church. Thought maybe you could use extra hands with cooking and cleaning after everything." Eleanor looked at the 5 women standing awkwardly in her yard. Women who'd laughed at her wedding, who'd mocked her in town, who'd made her feel invisible for years. Part of her wanted to send them away, to throw their belated kindness back in their faces. But she recognized the genuine shame in their expressions. And more importantly, she recognized that holding on to anger would only hurt herself. "Thank you," Eleanor said. "We could use the help. Kitchen's through here." The day transformed into something unexpected. The women worked alongside Eleanor, initially stiff and formal, but gradually loosening as they fell into the rhythm of cooking for a dozen hungry men. They brought news from town. Sheriff Boone had been officially stripped of his badge, the corrupt judge had fled the territory, and several of Victor's business partners were being investigated. Red Hollow was slowly cleaning house. "People are talking about you," Sarah Whitmore's mother said as she kneaded dough. She'd been the loudest critic at the wedding. "About how you stood up to Victor, how you held this ranch together." Eleanor seasoned a stew, not looking up. "Let them talk." "No, you don't understand. They're saying you're the toughest woman in the territory, that you've got more spine than most men." The older woman paused. "My daughter Sarah asked me to tell you she was wrong about you. We all were." Eleanor finally looked up. "I appreciate that, but I didn't do any of this for your approval." "I know. That's what makes it matter." Mrs. Whitmore's hand stilled in the dough. "I spent my whole life worrying about what people thought, made myself sick with it. Watching you just not care, not let anyone make you small, it's inspiring and humbling." The other women murmured agreement, and Eleanor felt something shift. These weren't enemies anymore. They were just people trying to figure out their own paths, their own strength. "Well," Eleanor said, "if you really want to help, you can teach me how to make those biscuits Sarah's always bragging about. Mine keep coming out dense as bricks." Laughter rippled through the kitchen, and the tension finally broke. By evening, the house was full of food, and the yard was full of people. The rancher families Victor had burned out arrived to hear Cade's proposal about the cooperative. Marshal Briggs stopped by to give updates on the legal proceedings. Even Ben, who dropped his drifter disguise, stuck around to share a drink with the men he'd worked alongside. Eleanor moved through the crowd, making sure everyone had food, had coffee, had what they needed. She caught snippets of conversation, plans for rebuilding, hopes for the future, laughter that came easier now that the threat had passed. Marcus cornered her near the barn, his crutches making movement awkward but determination keeping him upright. "Mrs. Mercer, I've been thinking about what you said, about this being home." He shifted his weight. "I don't have family. Lost them all to fever when I was 16. Been drifting ever since, working ranches but never belonging anywhere." Eleanor waited, seeing where this was heading. "This place feels different. Feels like maybe I could stop drifting." Marcus met her eyes. "If you and the boss would have me permanent-like, not just as a hand, but as, I don't know, family, maybe." Eleanor's throat went tight. "Marcus, you nearly died on this ranch." "Yeah, but you saved me. And more than that, you fought for me. Rode into that storm, set my leg, sat with me every day while I healed." His voice went rough. "Nobody's ever done that for me before. Nobody's ever made me feel like I mattered." Eleanor understood that feeling. The ache of being invisible, of wondering if anyone would notice if you disappeared. She'd lived it for 20 years. "You do matter," she said firmly. "And of course your family. That was never a question." Marcus's smile could have lit the whole valley. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll work hard, I promise. Earn my keep." "I know you will." Eleanor squeezed his shoulder. "Now go get some food before those men eat everything." She watched him hobble away and felt Cade come to stand beside her. "You know what you just did?" he asked quietly. "Told a boy he had a home? You built a family." Cade gestured at the people gathered in their yard. "Look at them. Ranch hands who die for this place. Neighbors who came to help. People who finally see what I saw 6 months ago, that you're extraordinary." Eleanor watched the scene. Jack laughing with Reverend Hendricks, Tommy showing Mrs. Hendricks the garden Eleanor had coaxed into life, women from town serving food alongside ranch wives they'd never spoken to before. It looked like community. like the kind of gathering where everyone belonged. "I never thought I'd have this," Eleanor said. "People who cared. A place that felt like mine. Someone who—" She stopped, the words catching. "Someone who loves you?" Cade finished. "Better get used to it. I'm not good with words, Eleanor, but I'm good at showing up, at standing beside you, at fighting for what matters, and you matter more than anything." Eleanor leaned into him, letting herself take comfort in his solid presence. "I love you too, in case that wasn't clear." "It's getting there." They stood together watching their people, because that's what they were now, their people. And Eleanor felt the last piece of her old self finally let go. The invisible woman from the boarding house was gone. The frightened widow who'd stood on that platform while a town laughed was gone. In their place was someone new. Someone forged in storms and fear and the daily choice to keep standing. Someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and choosing to get back up anyway. The next morning, Cade gathered the ranch hands in the barn. Eleanor stood beside him as he laid out his plan. "I'm not mining the silver," he announced. "Not in the traditional way. Instead, I'm creating a cooperative. Every family that stood with us against Victor gets a share of the mineral rights. If we ever do develop it, everyone profits. If we don't, you still have the security of owning something valuable." The men shifted, uncertain. This wasn't how things were usually done. "But there's more," Cade continued. "I'm also dividing portions of the ranch itself. Jack, you've worked this land for 6 years. You get the eastern pasture, 30 acres and the water rights that go with it. Tommy, you get the southern meadow. Pete, the timber stand. Marcus, once you're healed, the North Creek property." Stunned silence. "Boss," Jack's voice was rough, "you can't just give away your land." "I'm not giving it away. I'm investing in family. Every one of you has bled for this place. You've earned more than wages." Cade's expression was firm. "This way, we all have stake in keeping Iron Ridge strong. We all have reason to defend it. We become something bigger than just a ranch. We become a community that can't be broken by men like Victor." Eleanor watched the realization spread across the men's faces. They were being offered real ownership, real futures, real belonging. "There's one condition," Cade added. "You work your parcels. You help maintain the whole ranch, and you stand with us if trouble comes again. We're a family now. That means we protect each other." "Yes, sir," the men replied in unison, their voices thick with emotion. The meeting broke up with men shaking Cade's hand, clapping each other on the shoulders, already making plans for their new properties. Eleanor saw Jack wipe his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Later, she found the old foreman sitting on the porch, staring at the eastern pasture that was now his. "You all right?" Eleanor asked. "I'm 63 years old," Jack said quietly. "Worked ranches my whole life, never owned a thing. Always figured I'd die broke and be buried in a pauper's grave." He looked at her. "Your husband just gave me something I never thought I'd have. A legacy. Land I can leave to someone when I'm gone. You earned it. Maybe, but most bosses don't see it that way. Most bosses take and throw you away when you're used up." Jack's voice went rough. "What you and Cade are building here, it's different. It's how things should be, but rarely are." Eleanor sat beside him. "My whole life, I was taught that people like us don't get happy endings. We survive if we're lucky, and that's supposed to be enough. But Cade and I, we're choosing something different. We're choosing to build something that takes care of people instead of using them up. You think it'll last? I don't know, but I know we'll fight to make it last, and that counts for something." The weeks that followed were busy with legal proceedings. Victor Grayson and Sheriff Boone both went to trial in Helena, where federal prosecutors laid out years of corruption and violence. Eleanor and Cade testified, along with a dozen other victims. The trials took 3 weeks, and when they ended, both men were sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Red Hollow elected a new sheriff, a former Army captain who'd served with honor and had no ties to Victor's network. The town council was cleaned out, replaced with people who actually cared about the community. And slowly, carefully, the territory began to heal. Eleanor made a trip to town 6 weeks after Victor's arrest. She needed supplies, and more importantly, she needed to face the place that had humiliated her. The general store went quiet when she walked in. Every eye turned toward her, and Eleanor felt the old familiar urge to make herself smaller, to apologize for taking up space. But she didn't. She walked to the counter with her head up and her list in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson. I need these supplies." The shopkeeper took the list, his expression respectful. "Of course, Mrs. Mercer. I'll have everything ready within the hour." "Mrs. Mercer," a voice called from the back of the store. Sarah Whitmore approached, her face bright with genuine warmth. "I was hoping to see you. Mother said you showed her how to make that venison stew. Would you be willing to share the recipe with me?" Eleanor blinked, surprised. "Of course." They talked for 20 minutes, about cooking, about the ranch, about Sarah's recent engagement to a deputy marshal. It was the first real conversation Eleanor had ever had with one of the young women who'd expected to be chosen at that wedding. "I owe you an apology," Sarah said quietly. "I laughed that day. When Cade called your name, I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I know I heard you. I was cruel and stupid, and I've regretted it every day since." Sarah met her eyes. "You're 10 times the woman I am. You've got courage I'll never have. And I'm sorry I couldn't see it then." Eleanor could have nursed that grudge, could have made Sarah feel the weight of her cruelty. But what would be the point? Holding on to anger wouldn't change the past, and it would only poison her future. "Apology accepted," Eleanor said. "Now, about that recipe. You need to brown the meat first, or it comes out tough." Word spread quickly that Eleanor Mercer was in town, and people made excuses to walk past the general store to catch a glimpse of the woman who'd stood down Victor Grayson. Some nodded respectfully, some tipped their hats. A few even stopped to thank her for making the territory safer. Mrs. Talbot appeared just as Eleanor was loading her supplies into the wagon. The boarding house owner looked older, more worn, less certain of herself. "Eleanor," she said stiffly, "I heard what happened, with Victor and the siege. News travels fast. I wanted to say—" Mrs. Talbot stopped, struggling with words. "I never treated you well. I saw you as cheap labor, not as a person. And I was wrong." Eleanor studied the woman who'd made her life miserable for 6 years. She could see the genuine regret in Mrs. Talbot's expression, the shame that came from realizing you'd been cruel for no good reason. "You were wrong," Eleanor agreed. "But I'm not angry anymore. I'm too busy being happy to waste energy on being bitter." Mrs. Talbot nodded slowly. "You look different, stronger, like you finally figured out who you were." "I did. Turns out I'm someone who doesn't need your approval to know my worth." Eleanor climbed onto the wagon and drove away, leaving Mrs. Talbot standing in the street. It felt like closing a door on a chapter of her life that had needed ending. The ride back to Iron Ridge Ranch felt different than every other journey she'd made. This time she wasn't running from something. She was returning home, to people who valued her, to work that mattered, to a husband who loved her not despite her perceived flaws, but because of the strength those experiences had forged. Cade was waiting when she pulled up, and he helped her unload supplies with easy conversation about fence repairs and cattle prices. Normal, domestic, beautifully ordinary. That night, they ate dinner with the full crew, 15 people now that the cooperative families had started building homes on their parcels. The kitchen table couldn't hold everyone, so they'd moved the meals outside when weather permitted, gathering in the yard like some kind of frontier feast. Jack told a story about his first trail drive that had everyone laughing. Tommy challenged Marcus to an arm wrestling match that Marcus won despite his healing leg. One of the rancher wives had brought her fiddle, and music drifted across the valley as the sun set behind the mountains. Eleanor stood at the edge of the gathering, watching her family, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of the constant fear that had colored her life for so long. "You did this," Cade said, coming to stand beside her. "Built this. This isn't just a ranch anymore, it's a community, and you're the heart of it." "We did this," Eleanor corrected. "Together." "Fair enough." He slipped his arm around her waist, and Eleanor leaned into him, comfortable in a way she'd never been with anyone. "Can I tell you something?" Eleanor asked. "Something I've been thinking about?" "Always. That day at the wedding, when everyone laughed, I wanted to die. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. I'd never felt so humiliated in my life." "I know. But looking back now, I realized that was the best thing that could have happened to me." Eleanor watched the firelight dance across the faces of people she loved. "Because it broke something in me. Some old belief that I had to be small and quiet and grateful for scraps. It made me so angry that I finally fought back, finally stood up. She turned to look at Cade. You didn't save me that day. You just gave me a reason to save myself, and I'm grateful for that. Cade's expression went soft. You know what I think? I think you were always strong. You just needed room to show it. All I did was give you the space. Maybe, but you saw me when I was invisible, and that mattered more than you know. They stood together watching their people celebrate, watching the life they'd built against all odds, and Eleanor understood something fundamental about human strength. It wasn't about never being afraid. It wasn't about never being hurt or humiliated or broken. Strength was about getting back up, about choosing to fight even when it seemed impossible, about believing you were worth the effort of survival. She'd spent 20 years being told she wasn't worth much, being treated like furniture, like something to be tolerated but never valued. And she'd believed it, had let that poison seep so deep into her bones that she'd forgotten how to stand tall. But then a stranger had called her name in front of a laughing crowd, had offered her a different kind of life, and instead of running from the humiliation, she'd walked forward into it. That single choice had changed everything. Not because it made life easy. Life at Iron Ridge Ranch was brutal and demanding, and sometimes terrifying, but because it gave her the chance to discover who she really was beneath all the layers of learned helplessness and forced invisibility. She was Eleanor Mercer, wife, healer, defender, leader. A woman who rode into storms and faced down corrupt men and built community from scattered, broken people. A woman who'd learned that her worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions, but by her own choices, her own courage, her own refusal to stay down when life knocked her flat. The music shifted to something slower, and couples started to dance, awkward frontier dancing that was more stomping than grace, but full of joy anyway. Dance with me, Cade said. I don't know how. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. That had become their philosophy, figuring things out together, stumbling through the difficult parts, celebrating the victories, and never giving up even when it seemed impossible. Eleanor let Cade pull her into the dancing crowd. They stepped on each other's feet and laughed and held each other close, and it was perfect in its imperfection. This was her life now, not the one she'd imagined as a young woman, not the fairy tale she'd once hoped for, but something better, something real and hard-won and entirely hers. As winter approached, the ranch prepared for the brutal Montana cold. Wood was stacked, food was preserved, animals were moved to protected pastures. The cooperative families built their homes with help from the ranch crew, and by the first snowfall, 5 new structures dotted the expanded Iron Ridge property. Eleanor stood on the porch one morning watching snow fall across the valley, turning everything white and clean. Cade came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. Thinking about anything in particular? He asked. About how far we've come? About where we started? Eleanor sipped the hot coffee, grateful for the warmth. About the woman I was 6 months ago. She's gone now. No, she's still here, just stronger, just finally allowed to be everything she always was. Eleanor looked at her husband. That's the thing people don't understand about strength. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more fully yourself, about stripping away all the fear and shame that kept you small and just being. Cade nodded slowly. You're going to write that down? Sounds like something people should remember. Maybe. Or maybe I'll just live it. Show people through example that you don't have to accept the role other people assign you, that you can choose something different even when it seems impossible. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their world turn white. Behind them, the house was warm and full of life. The men were finishing breakfast, Marcus was pestering Tommy about something, Jack was organizing the day's work. This was home. This was family. This was the life Eleanor Mercer had built from the wreckage of humiliation and the raw materials of courage. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The woman the town had mocked had become the woman the territory respected, not by changing who she was, but by refusing to apologize for it, not by becoming perfect, but by becoming fully, honestly, courageously herself. That was the victory Victor Grayson had never understood. He'd thought power came from control, from forcing others to submit, from building empires on fear. But real power came from standing up after being knocked down, from building community instead of hierarchy, from choosing love and loyalty over greed and control. Eleanor had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, through public humiliation, through fear, through moments when giving up seemed like the only reasonable option. But she'd kept standing, kept fighting, kept choosing to be more than what other people expected. And in the end, that had made all the difference. As spring returned to Montana territory, bringing green to the valleys and melting the snow from the peaks, Iron Ridge Ranch thrived. The cooperative grew stronger, the community deeper. Eleanor's garden expanded, her medical skills became known throughout the county, and her kitchen became the heart of a family that now numbered 30 people across 7 properties. She never forgot where she'd started, never forgot the woman who'd stood on that platform while a town laughed. But she didn't dwell on it either. That pain had served its purpose. It had pushed her to become who she needed to be. Now she focused on building, on nurturing, on showing every person who came through her door that they mattered, that they belonged, that their worth wasn't determined by other people's cruelty. Because if Eleanor Mercer, fat widow, invisible cook, the woman no one expected, could build this life, then anyone could. All it took was courage, not the kind that came easy, but the kind you chose every single day. The kind that said, I'm worth fighting for even when everything else said you weren't. That was the real story. Not the siege or the corruption or the dramatic confrontations, but the quiet daily choice to keep standing, to keep trying, to keep believing that you deserved more than what fear and shame offered. Eleanor had made that choice, had paid for it in sweat and tears and moments of absolute terror. But she'd won. Not because she defeated Victor Grayson, though she had, but because she defeated the voice in her own head that said she wasn't enough, and that victory would last forever. The end came not with fanfare, but with an ordinary morning. Eleanor woke beside her husband, made breakfast for her family, worked in her garden, tended to her people. The same things she did every day, the same routines that made up a life. But as she stood in the kitchen that evening, hands covered in flour as she prepared bread for tomorrow, she caught her reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back at her was someone she barely recognized from that wedding day. Older, yes. More lined, more weathered by hard living, but also more alive, more present, more fully, completely herself. And she was smiling, not the careful, practiced smile of someone trying to avoid notice, but a real smile born of genuine happiness and hard-won peace. Eleanor Mercer had found her place in the world. Not because someone gave it to her, but because she'd fought for it, built it with her own hands, and refused to let anyone, including herself, tell her she didn't deserve it. That was worth more than all the silver in the mountains. That was worth everything.